It's not easy to keep a series going strong, especially if you start things out on a high point. That only creates an even higher wall to scale when you make a sequel. At the most basic level, it comes down to two things: adding on to what was introduced in the previous entry and meeting fans' expectations set by said entry. So after the fantastic start Star Force 1 was for Capcom's brand new Mega Man series, would its inevitable sequel keep up that momentum? Hello everyone, this is the RPG Monger, and today I'll be talking about Mega Man Star Force 2. Coming out less than a year after the first game in true Mega Man fashion, Star Force 2 is an interesting one to say the least. If I had to describe the game in a single sentence, I'd say it takes one step forward and two steps back. Though starting on the positive, the Star Force battle system received many improvements in 2. Remember those star cards that the DX patch brought in? Well, now you can obtain them in 2 from these massive viruses. Like their normally region-locked predecessors, star cards once again enhance attacks when used in battle. Only to keep them from making you too OP, you can't have any duplicate star cards in a deck, and you can't put in more than 3. In the spirit of making things harder than the first game, there would also be much needed changes like lowering the amount of cards you can favorite, along with just in general providing way more challenging battles. Don't worry by the way, despite that, this game has more than enough ways to make you ridiculously strong. Most obvious from the moment you even pick up the game is kind of like Battle Network 5's TS port, Star Force 2 combines different game versions. Like Star Force 1, it still technically has 3 versions, it's only that out of Zerker, Ninja, and Saurian, Zerker is available in both versions. Of course, ideally things would be better if all versions were combined, but it's better than the first game's ridiculous decision of splitting itself in 3. This change manifests itself in the actual gameplay too, the special forms this time around coming with some brand new mechanics to make the system stand out. Starting with the first one I got with Zerker, each of Star Force 2's transformations, or tribonds, are based upon the power of different tribes that form the ancient civilization of Mu. For Thunder Zerker, the power of the Fallen Empire's warriors grants Mega Man the element of electricity and a boost in power to any electric cards. On top of that, rather than every form having Side Select in Star Force 1, Zerker is the only one that has it in 2, making it a pretty solid choice to start with. Oh, and it also lets you deal multiple attacks at once by charging a non-dimming card, but I didn't find myself using that very often. Then, onto Wood Ninja, Mega Man gains the power of Mu's stealthier tribe, which ends up being about what you'd expect if you've been playing these games for a while. Like another certain ninja form, Wood Ninja brings back anti-damage along with a shuriken charge shot, which combined with other perks like charging cards to pierce enemies and a power boost to wood attacks does make Ninja a solid choice as well. If only I was actually good at the timing needed to trigger anti-damage. Lastly, with Saurian, things take a drastic shift in theming. With Zerker and Ninja, they make sense when thinking of an ancient empire. Though with Fire Saurian literally representing dinosaurs that attacked Mu, it makes me think that some executive just let their kid into a board meeting to decide things. Regardless, Saurian fittingly packs a punch, with super armor, an attack boost to fire cards, and another attack boost if you charge a normal card. Clearly, as you can see, these forms are a definite improvement over the far more bland ones in the first game, but where they truly shine is the double tribe system. Basically, how it works is through combining the form you start out with and the form you get either from your in-game brother or a brother formed with another version of the game, the forms will combine both their designs and powers to make Mega Man even stronger. Say you start off with Zerker, well if you then merged it with Ninja, the resulting double tribe would still contain many aspects of Zerker like its charge shot, but also gain the abilities of Ninja like anti-damage. It's really neat. And it doesn't stop there, because if you manage to assemble all 3 forms in a single fight, you'll temporarily gain access to the Tribe King. By far one of the most satisfying mechanics in the game, especially when pulling it off saves you from losing, the Tribe King comes with tremendous power. It may only last 3 turns, but in that time the form has no weaknesses, contains the abilities of all 3 forms, wields a powerful charge shot, and is capable of dealing massive damage with its unique counterattack. If there ever was a surefire way to turn the tides of battle, this is it and then some. I'm not even sure how many times I popped off throughout playing this one every time I managed to summon this form. Its only downside is since it relies on you having at least one IRL brother who has the form not included in your version, Tribe King is technically not accessible without codes if you play Star Force 2 entirely on your own. And that's just the beginning of this game doing stuff like that, since with the introduction of Link Power, a lot more aspects of this game get affected by how many friends you've created brother bands with. Not even going into the bizarre function of Link Power in Star Force 2 Society yet, in the game, Link Power replaces the perks that came with brothers in Star Force 1 along with unlocking other things in the game. Like Tribe King, it's once again a little bit annoying seeing things like these locked behind physically knowing multiple other people who play the game, but the good thing here is you can customize what abilities you have again. Even so, I still vastly prefer the final iteration of the Navi customizer to this. At least they made it so that in-game brothers and IRL brothers are actually separate as opposed to them sharing the same space in the first game, though if you end up not getting any brothers at all, there is one special form that you can try out, Mega Man Rogue. And as cool as that sounds, trust me, it's not all that worth it. Taking away your ability to double tribe or form the Tribe Tribe King, Rogue form is more of a buff to your version's base form, coming with such alluring features like no weaknesses, a massive power boost to sword cards in place of the elemental boost, a 1 HP barrier that regenerates every turn, and a passive ability that breaks enemy lock-ons in multiplayer. It seems great at first. The trade-off is along with the loss of brothers, Mega Man can no longer use Mega Cards. That being said, if you're determined enough to still use the Rogue form, it is possible to create builds around it that'll make the form incredibly powerful too. When it comes down to personal preference, I just really enjoy the Tribe King. In fact, technically there is a way to get the Rogue form without even sacrificing your brothers. Enter the Wave Command system. Originally, when the game was first released, there were these card kits sold separately that, if you input the card's pattern into the game, would turn a blank card into whatever that specific code was for. Essentially, it was pay to win before that concept had even become so widespread. Nowadays though, it's become a built-in way to utterly demolish fights if you so choose, many codes bestowing incredibly powerful attacks and even the capability to start a fight in Tribe King form. I could only imagine how much that got abused in 2's online battles. On top of all that, one more addition I personally really liked was how they brought in Hertzes in battles. Basically, they're the same as when items appeared in Battle Network's battles where you've got to protect them for a reward. Only here, I feel infinitely more guilty when I don't manage to save one. However, that's about it when it comes to all the new battle modifications. Locking things behind brothers aside, it's all pretty decent. And sadly, that's probably the best part of this game in my opinion, because the story this time around is a serious downgrade. At the beginning, things honestly don't start off bad. Following the heavy events of the first game, Star Force 2 sees a happy Geo who's doing his best to enjoy life. Even the Wave World got a pretty significant change, real-world areas now getting combined with Wave Roads, which I personally thought was pretty neat. Unfortunately, whether it be due to wanting players to use the new mechanics or purely for padding's sake, these larger Wave Worlds contain boatloads of random encounters. Now listen, I've said it before and I'll say it again, I'm no stranger when it comes to high encounter rates. If the game that has them brings in quality battle mechanics to make up for them, they aren't so bad, especially if the battles themselves are fast-paced. But as I went through Star Force 2 and encountered certain choice locations, even my patience began to run thin. At least all these fights gave me enough money to buy every cloaker in existence. Moving on to other changes in the game's world, let me touch on Link Power again, since like many Mega Man RPGs, this game cranks the dystopian factors up to 100. Basically, with a person's link power rising the more popular they are, the way this society's blatantly stated to treat those with a higher link power better is pretty messed up. Finally, a Mega Man game where I have a social credit score. And in the People's Republic of Electopia, there's a new technology called matter waves which are all the rage. Which is understandable considering that through advanced EM wave technology, physical objects can be conjured out of thin air. As many of these objects can also be intelligent, matter waves functionally replace what few Nabbies remained in Star Force's world, sadly erasing the vestiges of Battle Network. Though don't fret, shockingly, there is some Battle Network content in this game that you can unlock through inserting a Battle Network game in the DS's GBA slot, but I'll go over all that later. Back on topic with the story, one of my largest disappointments with Star Force 2 is its decision to go the lazy route of storytelling, completely opposite to its predecessor. Because as opposed to all the creative arcs caused by the Ephemians, Star Force 2 falls back into full-on Saturday morning cartoon territory, complete with an abundance of unremarkable writing. It's a shame too, since Star Force 2 had a lot of potential, like its theme this time around focusing on mythical creatures. I've seen quite a few people complain about the change, but I honestly didn't have a problem with it. It's the subpar characters paired with said creatures that used up most of my goodwill. Take the game's first arc, mostly serving to acclimate the player to the game's characters and setting, and nearly all the conflicts in this game are a result of a pretty bland team of villains led by, you guessed it, an outcast scientist. It's not like you can't make that premise work, as many of these Mega Man RPGs are shining examples of that, but they're just so generic here. First there's Hyde, the redditor of the team, who after fusing with the EM being a Phantom, is pretty easy even in harder forms. The only really notable thing about his arc is his stage, or lack thereof, depending on how you look at it. In Star Force 2, with the game adding the real world as part of the Wave World, most of its stages end up taking place in these areas rather than in an entirely unique location. Which, hey, I can appreciate that they wanted to try something new, I'm just not the biggest fan of it. The unique stages of Battle Network and then Star Force 1 work much better in my opinion. Outside of that, these new stage formats still contain unique mechanics in each one, so they essentially function the same way. In this one, it thankfully doesn't use the touchscreen, as all you've gotta do is avoid ghosts. It's a good thing too, because there's no DX patch to save you now. All in all, the first stage is a very standard affair. I did enjoy those little ghost enemies it brought in. Funny how in an effort to make everything in the world futuristic and advanced, the movie theater here looks like an arguably worse viewing experience than if you just sat down and watched a screen. Thankfully, Geo and Omega still have quality dialogue, though the same can't be said for a lot of the characters. Bud is still Bud, so no issue there, but man, I feel like every other dialogue box out of Zack Zack is him talking about his Zackpedia in this game. I really should have created a counter for it. And then there's Luna. Following the decent character development she got towards the end of the last game, here she's been exposed to a bit too much Soon radiation to say the least. Though I can't hate on her too much, what with her utterly destroying Zack's entire career. So going into the next arc, things are still pretty alright. It's nothing like where the first game was at this point, but the writing is standard enough. In fact, this arc gives Bud some pretty decent moments, which earns it points in my book. Glad to see that this game brought back some of the original bosses from the first game, as I always enjoyed when Battle Network did that. In terms of the arc's villain, it's from here on where the structure of the majority of Star Force 2 gets established, as replacing the role of Ephemians in the first game, Hyde goes around fusing these special EM beings called UMAs with people unsatisfied with their lives. In a sense, it's pretty similar to what the first game did in concept, only unfortunately, it's far more bare bones. Whereas before, Ephemians took advantage of good people that were going through a crisis in order to manipulate them, the antagonists Hyde creates are pretty one-dimensional. Like in this arc with the interestingly named Rich.com, he's your typical malicious businessman trying to buy out Grizzly Peak from the man who owns it. The only real notable thing about him is in his subsequent stage and fight, it definitely provided a bit more challenge compared to his counterpart in Star Force 1. While I do think the skiing minigame was a cool idea, I sucked at it. Finally, some proper monkey representation in my Star Force games. Following Bud getting his time in the spotlight, in the next arc, Sonya is back, apparently also having returned to the idol industry. I've gotta say, she definitely seems to be happy doing it now, but I expected they'd have her take a longer break considering how serious her arc was. Regardless, like the last arc, this one isn't all that bad either, mainly since it's here where some pretty important plot points begin trickling in, along with the proper introduction of the Edgelord to end all Edgelords. Meanwhile, taking a museum tour, Geo and Sonya learn that at some point far into the past, a highly advanced civilization had suddenly vanished along with a continent it resided on. This lost civilization of Mu that I mentioned earlier on is a central plot point for Star Force 2, their society even having invented star carriers like the one used in the game Society, which by that logic technically means Star Force tech existed throughout the entire Battle Network timeline unbeknownst to anybody. It's definitely one of the more bizarre plot points, that's for sure. Then in a strange attack by some mysterious eyes, this scenario ends with Geo stopping them from stealing the version-specific out-of-place artifact, or OOP art, Omega accidentally eating it whole. I swear, the constant random encounters combined with the QuickTime events here gave me flashbacks to another certain scenario I'd prefer never to think about again. And speaking of weird plot points, one of the dumber things in this game is how whenever it's convenient for the plot, Geo's wave change form becomes magically visible to everyone around him. Like that's it, there's no real explanation other than it happening at the whims of the writers. Anyways, in the next day, as this game adheres far more to the base formula many Battle Network games followed, it's about time for Geo to get his rival. Manufactured from the purest edge around, this new rival named Solo is probably one of the most basic rivals imaginable throughout Star Force 2. Straight up, the way he acts when you meet him is gonna be the way he'll be for the rest of the game. Don't get me wrong, I can always appreciate some good quality edge, I'm a Final Fantasy fan after all. It's just, man, Solo in this game is almost as if they created a character by meeting the bare minimum of what qualifies as a rival. In turn, what with Star Force placing a big importance on brother bands, Solo fittingly can't stand friendship. But character aside, I'll give him one thing, they definitely didn't skimp out on his design. Not to mention, when push comes to shove, at least Solo can back up his convictions, since especially later on, his fights were some of the hardest. And in his only character trait of hating friendship, Solo sets up the next few arcs by sending nearly all of Geo's friends to far-off locales. Now you must be wondering, with the first few arcs all being fine to varying degrees, what's all the fuss about this game having a whatever story? Well, in the fourth arc, that's when things begin to noticeably decline. You wouldn't know it from how things start either, since Geo does receive one of the few bits of development this game gives him here. Just coming back from failing to save his friends, Geo is understandably crushed that he couldn't do anything, and surprisingly, Luna actually makes some decent points to help reel him out of his slump. Even Geo's mom gets some quality dialogue here, Hope Stellar motivating her son with some impactful things his father once said. Doesn't make up for what's up ahead though. After having another encounter with the Redditor and fighting Ophiucha again, Geo utilizes the power of his social credit score to achieve the first tribe transformation. About time too, up until now they'd been building it up forever. Subsequent to that, the first of the scattered friends to be found is Zack, who'd been sent all the way to a town in Netopia called Lockmess. Following the formula literally all of these games have said, you'd think this new area would be a mere bus ride away, right? Well, if you think that, clearly you've underestimated the Star Force devs' capabilities fees for packing in padding because conveniently to the plot, Geo doesn't have a passport. Thus, rather than having fast travel like every other Mega Man RPG until now, Geo's got to take the Skywave. Composed of interconnected wave roads high in the sky, I genuinely thought the Skywave was cool when I first entered it. Its music was pretty nice. But looks can be deceiving because as you navigate the winding layout to reach your destination, the ridiculous amount of random encounters will ensure you barely get a chance to even hear its theme. Seriously, who in their right mind thought it was a good idea to force you to go through an area this big and useless just to progress? It's got to take the cake for some of the most shameless padding in any of these games. Like, its layout is already a bit annoying with how you've got to jump from area to area, but with the frequency of battles, I sometimes found myself accidentally backtracking after forgetting which direction I was headed. What's more insulting is later on, they do actually give you fast travel within the Skywave, which, don't get me wrong, isn't a bad thing, but it just makes it even more clear how pointless it all is. There's not a single thing I can think of that warrants it existing. It gets worse when you have to use it to travel to other areas as well. However, did you know there's actually a way to avoid this garbage padding entirely by changing your browsing location to anywhere in the world? Well, now you can, as this video is sponsored by Surfshark. Say bye-bye to wasting all your money on cloakers, as through using Surfshark, the Skywave is a thing of the past. Now, I'm sure you already know that using a VPN to change your location can open up all sorts of content you normally can't access, but more importantly, it's far more secure. Just imagine how easily all the conflicts in Battle Network could have been prevented if everyone had a VPN. Megaman.exe would have been put out of a job, because through encrypting your data as you browse, Surfshark keeps any would-be heel navies from stealing your data or figuring out your location. Especially if you're out and about, using a VPN is a must on public Wi-Fi. Just look what happened to Geo when he didn't use a VPN, he almost got run over by a truck. So if you're not already using them, do try out Surfshark with the code RPGMonger for 83% off and 3 extra months for free. Remember, if you don't want to constantly have random encounters like Geo here, use Surfshark. Anyways, back to the video. Sadly, after slogging through all that, things don't get much better. All this time, it turns out Zack has been living it up in Loch Ness, helping a TV show host search for the elusive Messi. I'll give this arc one thing, there was definitely an attempt to develop Zack into something more than the Zackpedia he's been up until now. It's just with the substandard writing, his struggles with an inferiority complex kind of come off as plain selfishness. I mean, just think about how hard Geo took his friends disappearing. Seeing that Zack's clearly been fine for a while, he has no valid reason for not calling his friends to let them know he's alive. And if that leaves a bad taste in your mouth, it's only an appetizer, because after Hyde gives a UMA to the History Channel guy, Geo's gotta stop him in the game's 3rd stage. You'd think, after the great variety of stages that have been created in both Star Force and Battle Network, that the devs would have it down to a science at this point. Well, sadly, apparently not, because solid tunes aside, this stage is one of the worst ones out of every Mega Man RPG. When looking at its individual parts, they don't seem all that bad either. While technically part of the area Geo was just in, this underwater stage gets a far more unique setting compared to the last 2 stages. In taking advantage of this setting, the mechanic this time around has Geo searching for treasure on the sea floor, which again sounds cool in theory. It's only that when paired with the random encounter rate, the massive size of the area, and the precise locations where you need to dig, it all loses its charm fast. As remember, if you even slightly miss where the game wants you to dig, you'll have another random encounter on your hands. It's a real shame. If they'd just lowered the random encounters a smidge or made the digging spots more forgiving, this stage had the makings to be a solid one. Hell, the card you get from the piranhas here ended up being one of my favorites. By the end, I just wanted to get the whole ordeal over with. Thankfully, the Plajo boss fight was alright at least. So with Zack and Luna making up, that's enough of that. This next arc definitely didn't get on my nerves as much as this one, but we're off to a not so great start with the Skywave once again being required. In the new area of Wazap, this arc revolves around the village's inhabitants who all seem to worship Mu. Getting wrapped up in their borderline cult, and amnesia-addled Bud, and now known as Budicus, becomes the focus of their worship since they believe he came from the long-lost civilization. I'm glad Star Force 2 got Bud both a girl and an entire cult. He deserves it. It's a pretty ridiculous one, no doubt about it, but I enjoyed how this arc clearly doesn't take itself all that seriously. Unfortunately, as if to balance out that funny moment, the area outside the village that has ancient carvings is host to one of the worst wave roads in the game. I remember being struck with pure despair when I decided to check it out with the visualizer, so one meaningless task later, this arc featured another solo fight. Despite growing stronger, he was no match against the best combo I'd gotten from a brother at that point, and from here on, this arc is pretty standard fare, the village leader getting a UMA and placing Geo's friends in peril, though I could have done without the game making you go on the Skywave again, only to have to return back to Wazap anyways. Thankfully, Terra Condor's stage is not remotely as annoying compared to the previous one. It still took around the same amount of time due to all the battles, but the mechanic of hiding from birds periodically was a fine one. In the boss fight at the end, I'll give this one props for being more dynamic. I know that massive barrage attack he does after a certain point took me by surprise. Regardless, now that the great almighty Butticus is safe and secure, that only leaves Sonya. To change things up from how they've been so far, this arc takes the more different approach of making Sonya the antagonist of her own arc. As with the villain's leader Vega threatening to harm Mega Man if she didn't comply, Sonya teams up with them to prevent that outcome. In concept, this more complicated premise for an arc has big potential to develop those involved, Geo and Sonya's friendship getting tested like never before. Only sadly, like a lot of this game, it falls victim to its own lackluster writing and execution. So with Depression 2, Serotonin Boogaloo kicking off, a lot of the scenes they intended to have emotional weight just missed entirely for me due to the rushed execution of it all. Hell, they even gave Luna another decent moment. It's like they made this arc with some scenes set in stone and others not decided yet, with those undecided ones just being rushed in the end. And one scripted loss later, Geo ends up in the Bermuda Maze. With the Harp Note fight that follows, nothing's really changed since Star Force 1, meaning it's still very easy. Again, I see what they were trying to do, but man, the way they structured everything here takes so much out of it. Though that's enough on that, as I need to save my ranting strength for what's to come. Let's move on now to the actual inside of the maze. Here's the thing with this area, while I do understand people disliking it for when you have to return here later, I honestly didn't mind the maze all that much when I first went through it, mainly since like any area that requires you to pay attention and solve puzzles, they actually did the smart thing and lowered the random encounter rate. See, despite their flaws, even the Star Force 2 devs weren't cruel enough to put the normal encounter rate here. I always liked it when DS games utilized the dual screens for puzzles like this. Though at the end of the maze, it's time to fight the mysterious Hollow. He's not that strong to be honest, but I did like how he was kind of the Star Force equivalent of Magic Man. And directly after that fight, it's solo time. Only before fighting him, the game finally reveals his backstory. As if it hasn't been obvious for a while, Solo is somehow the last survivor of Mu. Hearing that, you'd wonder how he's managed to survive all this time. Well, too bad. The game straight up never elaborates on that. What's even more pitiful is that even the anime gave an explanation for it. If I had to guess, Mu's technology probably had him frozen in time. But anyways, after entering the modern world, Solo was inexplicably hated by everyone he met, groups even beating him up due to racism, I think. It's so hastily explained I couldn't tell you. So then he became edgy, the end. For what it's worth, even with me forming Tribe King for the first time in this fight, it was still pretty wild. His fast-paced attacks combined with the shield he regenerates, making for a tense battle. Literally the only reason I won was due to a poison panel, and with Rogue grinded into a fine paste, we're headed for the finale. However, real quick before that, I should mention the minor Battle Network crossover present in Star Force 2, since it's actually pretty significant. Once you activate the crossover, a couple of Lan's diary entries become available as you progress through the game, all of them describing his adult life. Throughout the entries, we see a hopeful Lan aiming to make an impact now that he's become a scientist, some other characters showing up like Chad. I love how even as an adult, he's still the exact same. And in the entry that talks about Lan's son Patch, it's described that he received his own Navi named Mega Man Jr., a Navi that received the best qualities of both Roll and Mega Man. Guess by that logic it means Roll and Mega Man technically got together. Though most importantly, in the final entry, Lan details a hypothesis of his that alludes to things like Brother Bands and Link Power all being pioneered by him. I honestly couldn't ask for more. Glad they made the decision to show a bit more of Lan's life here. If anything, it makes me want a new game starring Patch. Regardless, let me get back to the topic at hand. Despite the back-to-back victories at the end of the last arc, Vega still gets her hands on the Oop art and begins her ultimate plans of summoning the entire continent of Mu. I've gotta say, with her having her whole shtick of only wanting the most talented individuals in society to survive her apocalypse, she really did pick the dumbest guy in Electopia as her partner. Thus, in bringing back the final part of her plans, an ancient being called Lemu, pretty much everything is coming together. Though speaking of Lemu, let me address something. In multiple points of the game, they say verbatim that Lemu created all EM waves, which in terms of the Star Force universe at large literally makes zero sense. Like, by this logic, some dumb statue thing on Earth created all EM beings, including those that lived on planet FM and AM. The only way you can somewhat dismiss this is the game actually meaning that Lemu created the EM waves on Earth. Even then, the way it's worded definitely doesn't seem like they meant it like that. It's so stupid. I love how in the midst of all this generic writing, even Omega seems to know this plot sucks. The only saving grace of this segment was in my playthrough here, the Giga card given to Geo is some next level stuff. Finally, the power of Monkey is rightfully mine. In turn, entering the final stage after erasing the Redditor off the face of the planet, Mu is an interesting one. As a concept, the stage is really cool. It's sending Geo through the long abandoned halls of the civilization. It's only that after an entire game without them, this is when they decided to bring back touch mechanics. Now, I can't speak for how the experience is playing on an actual DS, but when I went through this one on my limited edition Windows DS, I experienced a great deal of pain. Basically, to avoid having to battle these guard Guardian enemies, you've gotta trace the pattern that's shown for like a second, which with a mouse can be pretty challenging. Other than that, the mechanic of going around collecting patterns in Lord of Regress was pretty alright. To summarize what the lore covers, the ancient Murians were persecuted for their innate abilities to see EM waves, leading them to Lei Mu. Soon afterwards, Lei Mu would gift the Murians with the powers to control EM waves, this serving as a catalyst for the foundation of the Empire. In time, the Empire would split, however, some of their number abandoning war and others embracing it. Those who embraced war would then go all out, raising their lands into the skies and conquering everyone beneath them. To be fair to the game, I do appreciate them working storytelling into a stage like this. Anyhow, after the lengthy trial that was all that tracing for me, it's time for the final showdown. Except before that, Vega's gotta cram her backstory in, of course. For what it's worth, it's not a bad one, though I'll talk about it after this fight, since Lei Mu is no joke. I'll admit in terms of design, I still like Andromeda with its transformation more, but where Lei Mu lacks in that, it makes up for in sheer power. If not for the power of the Tribe King, I honestly don't know how many tries this would have taken me. The way its attacks sneak up on you all at once required all my attention and then some. However, through the power of Crab, Geo manages to defeat a god. Following that awesome fight, it's looking like Star Force 2 is gonna get a decent ending. I mean, at first, Vega's backstory was pretty interesting. Having come from a very humble background in an oppressive country, Vega wanted the country's incompetent ruler to fall more than anything, especially after her lover died in a war started by that same ruler. So in order to keep more unqualified fools like that leader from abusing their power, she wished to take the world from them. When I first heard this before the boss battle, it kind of felt lackluster to be honest. However, then when the game explains Hollow's origins, this was probably the most compelling part of the entire game. In an attempt to bring her lover back, Vega created the first Matter Wave, a copy of her lover, Altair. Only that in making a copy, Hollow was Altair in appearances alone, that fact never changing despite Vega's best efforts. Through that despair, this is how the game explains her delusional behavior that contradicts what her apparent intentions were. I still believe they could have written it better, but it works for what it is. Hell, they even got me to care about Hollow in the scene where he sacrifices himself, so that's not bad at all. If only the writers had left it at that. But no, in true Star Force 2 fashion, they've gotta squander that potential like their life depends on it. Because following that touching scene that would have served fine as a bookend to Vega's character, the real Altair magically talks to Vega from beyond the grave. It's been a while since I've been this floored by how dumb a plot point was. Cheesiness aside, the jarring insertion of this crap really feels like something that was put in merely to avoid things getting too dark. Finally, the Christian Mega Man game we've all been searching for has arrived. In a way, it kind of reminds me how they gave the backstory for Sean after beating Battle Network 2, only in that game they had enough sense not to write in this cheesy divine intervention nonsense. I guess the one bright side here is there's no way they could possibly have writing lazier than this, the game getting its state-mandated Power of Friendship sequence soon after. I don't know, it really shouldn't be this annoying to me, but I just expected better. After how touching Star Force 1's plot was, especially in its finale, I could have never imagined that they'd go from that to this. Although, in a reverse situation to that comparison, whereas Star Force 1 trumps 2's main story, 2 absolutely trumped 1's postgame in my opinion. Off the bat, taking place in one of the coolest settings established in one of these games, Star Force 2's postgame sees Geo entering an alternate dimension. Here, rather than Lei Mu getting defeated, Vega had her way and toppled civilization. In the abandoned locations left behind, pretty much all that's left are a few Hertzes, viruses, and EM beings created by Lei Mu itself. It's honestly really dark and a super creative concept for a postgame. In terms of how it plays out, well, there it's similar to the others. Explore an area, fight a boss, move on. What makes it worth it to me is these boss fights here had me on the ropes way more than the ones in Star Force 1. It's not even fair to compare the two in that regard. However, what really got me interested here above all else are the post-game exclusive fights they brought in. Ever since Battle Network 1, I've always looked forward to them making more of these, and Star Force 2 doesn't disappoint. The first one, General Auriga, is fairly challenging, but pretty doable at this point of the game. It's what comes after him with Apollo Flame where I got utterly incinerated. Not only having one of the sickest designs in all of Star Force, Apollo is also one of the most challenging fights in the series. Granted, having Avalanche in your deck will make him easier, but you still need to be good at dodging for this. And of course, he has a regenerating shield too. You'd think that with Apollo, we've pretty much reached the peak in terms of difficulty in Star Force 2. Well, not even close. Past the harder versions of post-game fights, there's the hardest version of Lei Mu. I'll be perfectly honest, much like the first version of Lei Mu, I don't know how I could have won without Tribe King. Still to this day, I can't perfectly dodge that Gatling attack. Though once you beat him, surprise surprise, there's still more. Locked behind beating him again, there's the true final fight of Star Force 2, Rogue SX. Talking about the game testing reaction time, Rogue is an actual blur here. Even when you start getting used to his attacks, they'll change up entirely in the second phase. Thank God for the brother cards I'd gotten from viewers up until that point. I don't know what I would have done without them. What's worse is if you're playing this on an original copy, you actually can't save in between the fights, meaning if you lose to Rogue, you've gotta beat Lame Moo again. What a nightmare. And if you manage to wake up from that nightmare, you've completed Star Force 2. Looking at Star Force 2 as a whole, it really is a shame how it turned out. In terms of battling, the quality was there. Seeing as one of my only complaints about Star Force 1 was a lack of challenge, Star Force 2 amended that and then some. It's just as somebody who really values the plot of a game, Star Force 2 was kind of nothing. The flimsy plot points combined with lazy writing made the story generic at best and insulting at worst. Sure, there's a couple decent moments sprinkled in, but it's not enough to carry the entire game. So if you enjoy Star Force 2 for its battle system, I can understand that viewpoint. I know those optional fights kept me on my toes. Glad to see Pat at least showed up a little bit here in the end. It may not be nearly as bad compared to Battle Network's low point, though similarly to that, a lot of Star Force 2 felt like they were just meeting a quota as opposed to what preceded it. Good news for anyone who does intend to play it though, just now when I've already recorded half of this video, the guy behind the DX patch just released a patch that lowers 2's encounter rate. Finally, I can actually hear the music of some of the areas without them getting cut off every 5 seconds. However, unlike Battle Network's worst game, Star Force 2 wouldn't be so lucky in terms of sales. With the effects of Mega Man oversaturation still going full force, the game sold worse than the first one, things like the anime on the side not doing much to help either. Now knowing Capcom, this noticeable decline could spell the end of Star Force right then and there, except by some miracle, a third game would still be greenlit. And having beaten it completely now, can I just say that wow, I cannot wait to gush about that one. Even the aspects it carries over from Star Force 2 end up better in that game. In fact, with Star Force 3 done, technically the only Star Force content left for me to play is the crossover remake of Battle Network 1, but before I inevitably stream that too, there's something else to be done. You see, in Star Force 2, there's actually some even stronger fights than that at the end of the post-game, and with me getting this video out, I figured why not stream those too. So in the coming days after this video's up, I'll be streaming both of those. I haven't decided on a date yet, since to be perfectly honest, I need to take a couple days to rest after this, but I'll let you all know on my Twitter when it's decided. Anyways, that's Star Force 2, the middle child of the series if there ever was one, which sadly never got the chance to be as good as it could have been. And now, for those who went the extra mile and supported me on Patreon, I'd like to give a heartfelt thank you to everyone who's decided to contribute. You guys are the best. If you want to help me continue making videos like these, and receive a special thank you amongst a lot of other bonus stuff, do check out my Patreon, link in the description. Before I end this video entirely, I once again have to thank those who tuned in to my Star Force 2 streams, especially those who helped me out by forming brother bands and making guides. I can say right now, Star Force 2 wouldn't have been nearly as fun without you all. So that being said, I'm the RPG Monger, and don't forget that each and every one of you are fantastic.